I'm Cecilia, 28 female. I live in a small, two-bedroom apartment in the city, a place I've curated with my own art, thrift store furniture, and an obscene number of plants. It's my sanctuary. As a graphic designer, my life is a careful balance of digital precision and creative chaos, a balance I've fought hard to achieve. My story begins with a simple, almost trivial act of displacement, a slight that felt less like an oversight and more like a deliberate statement. A statement that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, my home, and myself. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The phone call from my mother, Isabella, had been deceptively casual. "Cecilia, darling," she'd chirped, her voice light and airy, "Erin is coming to stay for a few weeks. Her lease is up and she's between apartments. It'll be fun, just like old times." I'd smiled, picturing my younger sister, Erin, with her whirlwind energy and infectious laugh. I worked from home, so a visit to my childhood house an hour's drive away was an easy and welcome break. "Of course, Mom," ID said. "I'll drive down this weekend. It will be great to see you both." The phrase, just like old times, echoed pleasantly in my mind, evoking memories of summer forts and whispered secrets. I had no idea how hollow those words would soon ring. I arrived on Saturday, my overnight bag slung over my shoulder, my laptop case in my other hand. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old books greeted me as I stepped through the front door. "I'm here," I called out. Isabella emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, a warm smile on her face. "There's my girl," she said, hugging me tightly. Erin bounded down the stairs a moment later, engulfing me in a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and hairspray. "Cease. It's so good to see you," she exclaimed. The initial warmth of the reunion was genuine, a comforting bubble that I settled into without a second thought. We spent the afternoon catching up, laughing over coffee as Erin recounted her latest adventures as a freelance photographer, a job that took her to exciting, far-flung places while I was tethered to my design clients and deadlines. It wasn't until evening, when I felt the familiar fatigue of a long work week settle in, that the first crack appeared in the idyllic family picture. "I think I'm going to turn in," I announced, stretching my arms above my head. "Just need to grab my bag and head up." I started for the stairs, my hand on the banister, when my mother's voice stopped me. "Oh, honey," she said, her tone suddenly hesitant. "About that, we've put Erin in your old room." I paused, turning to look at her. "My room." I repeated, confused. "But where am I sleeping?" My mother exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance with my sister. "Well," Isabella began, her hands fluttering nervously, "Erin has so much stuff, all her camera equipment and cases. Your room has the big closet, you see. It just made more sense. We've made up the couch for you. It's very comfortable." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. The couch. I looked from my mother's apologetic face to my sister, who was suddenly intensely interested in her phone. I was being asked to sleep on the sofa in the house I grew up in, while my sister, the visitor, occupied my bed. A bitter, unfamiliar feeling coiled in my stomach. It wasn't about the comfort of a bed versus a sofa, it was about the message. My room, the space that had been mine for 18 years, the room whose every creak and shadow I knew intimately, was no longer mine. I was a guest, an afterthought. "The couch," I said again, my voice flat. "Right, okay." Isabella's face was a mask of strained pleasantness. "It's just for a little while, sweetie, until Erin finds her own place. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. It felt like a demotion, a quiet and bloodless coup. The room wasn't just a collection of four walls, it was my history. It was the place I'd retreated to after my first heartbreak, the place I'd crammed for college exams, the place where the faint pencil marks measuring my height were still visible inside the closet door. It was the last tangible piece of my childhood, and it had just been given away without a second thought. Erin finally looked up, offering a small, half-hearted smile. "Sorry, Cease, it's just, I have so much gear, you know how it is." I didn't know how it was. My gear consisted of a laptop and a drawing tablet, both of which were sitting in their case by the door. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It's fine, I managed to choke out. I'm tired anyway. The couch will be great. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I retrieved a pillow and a blanket from the linen closet, the very act feeling like a trespass. As I set up my makeshift bed in the living room, the low murmur of their voices from the kitchen drifted towards me. They were talking about a new restaurant Aaron wanted to try, their laughter light and easy. The bubble of our happy reunion had burst, leaving me on the outside, looking in. The familiar shadows of the living room, once comforting, now seemed alien and unwelcoming. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a judgment, counting down the seconds of my displacement. I felt a profound sense of alienation, a feeling that I was an intruder in the one place on earth I was supposed to belong. That night, as I lay on the lumpy cushions, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me, I understood that something had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't just sleeping on the couch. I was being shown my place, and it was no longer where I thought it was. The next morning, the feeling of being an outsider only intensified. I woke early, my back aching from the awkward angle of the sofa cushions to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. Weekend breakfasts had always been a sacred ritual in our house, but as I walked into the kitchen, the scene that greeted me quickly dispelled any warmth. Isabella was at the stove, humming along to the radio, while Erin sat at the table, already dressed, scrolling through photos on her laptop. They both looked up as I entered, their smiles bright but to my newly sensitized eyes a little too practiced. "Morning, sleepyhead," Isabella said cheerfully. "Coffee's fresh." I poured myself a mug, my movements feeling stiff and self-conscious. I took a seat across from Erin, who briefly glanced up from her screen. "Sleep okay on the couch?" She asked, the question a clear formality. "It was fine," I lied, sipping my coffee. The conversation flowed around me, a current I couldn't seem to join. They talked about Erin's plans for the day, a potential photo shoot in a nearby town, and friends of hers they both knew. I was an audience member, a spectator to their shared life. My work, my clients, my world that seemed so significant just yesterday, felt distant and irrelevant here. Later that day, I tried to reclaim a small piece of my territory. I needed a book I had left on my bedside table months ago, a favorite collection of short stories I wanted to reread. I headed upstairs, the familiar creak of the third step a small comfort. But when I reached for the doorknob of my old room, I found it locked. I knocked lightly. "Erin, it's me." There was a shuffling sound, and then Erin opened the door a crack, her body blocking the entrance. "Hey, what's up?" she said, a hint of annoyance in her voice. "I just wanted to grab a book from my nightstand," I explained, trying to peer past her into the room. It was chaos. Her clothes were strewn over my armchair, and bulky black camera cases were stacked against the wall where my bookshelf used to be. "Oh," she said, her eyes flicking back into the room. "Right, can it wait? I'm in the middle of editing and everything is a mess." The dismissal was so casual, so absolute. It wasn't my room anymore, it was her workspace. I was an interruption. "Sure," I said, my voice tight. "No problem." I retreated back down the stairs, the sting of rejection sharp and unexpected. It was one thing to be told to sleep on the couch, it was another to be locked out of my own past. The days that followed fell into a painful rhythm. I would work from the dining room table, trying to focus on color palettes and font pairings while Isabella and Erin's lives unfolded around me. They would go shopping, have lunch with friends, and fill the house with their easy camaraderie. I was an island in their sea of togetherness. My mother, who I'd always considered my closest confidant, seemed distant. She was so absorbed in Erin's return, so delighted by her presence, that I felt invisible. She would ask about my work, but her eyes would glaze over as I explained a project, her attention already drifting back to whatever adventure Erin was planning next. I started to feel a creeping sense of resentment, a dark and ugly emotion that I tried to push down. This was my sister, my mother. I loved them. Why did I feel so utterly alone? Was I being overly sensitive? Was I jealous of Erin's more glamorous life? The self-doubt was exhausting. The breaking point came a week into my visit. I had a deadline for a major client, a rebranding project that required my full attention. I had been working for hours, hunched over my laptop at the dining table, when Aaron and Isabella came in, laden with shopping bags, their laughter filling the small house. "We found the most amazing little boutique," Aaron announced, pulling a silk scarf from a bag. "Isn't this gorgeous, Mom?" Isabella cooed in agreement, running the fabric through her fingers. The noise was distracting, a constant buzz that made it impossible to concentrate. "Guys," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "I'm really sorry, but I have to finish this. Could you maybe keep it down a little?" The request was met with a sudden, sharp silence. Isabella turned to me, her expression hardening. "Cecilia, don't be rude. Aaron is here for a visit. We're allowed to enjoy ourselves in our own home." Our home, not my home. The distinction was subtle but clear. Aaron chimed in, her tone laced with faux sympathy. "It's fine, Mom, I get it. Cease's work is very important." The condescension was unmistakable. I felt my face flush with anger and humiliation. "It is important," I snapped, my voice rising. "It pays my bills, it's my career." Isabella stepped forward, her hands on her hips. "There's no need to take that tone. You've been moping around with a long face ever since you got here. I don't know what your problem is, but you are ruining this visit." The accusation struck me like a physical blow. I was the problem. My presence, my work, my feelings, they were an inconvenience. I was ruining their happy reunion. "My problem?" I said, my voice trembling. "My problem is that I came home to my home and I've been treated like a stranger. My room is locked, I'm sleeping on a couch, and you two act like I'm not even here. I feel like a guest, a nuisance you have to tolerate." The words tumbled out, a torrent of a week's worth of hurt and frustration. Isabella stared at me, her face a mixture of shock and anger. "That is a ridiculous and selfish thing to say. We are doing our best to accommodate everyone." "Accommodate me?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "By kicking me out of my own room?" Aaron stepped between us. "Okay, let's all just calm down," she said, holding up her hands. "Cease, you're obviously stressed. Maybe you should just go back to your apartment if you're so unhappy here." The suggestion, so casually delivered, was the final, devastating blow. Go back to my apartment. Go away. I was being dismissed, exiled from my own family. I looked at my mother, hoping she would intervene, that she would defend me, that she would say, "Don't be silly, Aaron, this is her home too." But she said nothing. She just stood there, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. In her silence, I heard everything I needed to know. I was no longer a part of the inner circle. I was on the outside. Without another word, I packed my laptop, gathered my few belongings from the living room floor, and walked out the door. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of tears and angry, disjointed thoughts. The sanctuary of my own space, which I had left so eagerly a week ago, was now my only refuge. The feeling of being a stranger in my own home was no longer a feeling, it was a fact. And as I unlocked my apartment door, the quiet solitude that greeted me felt less like loneliness and more like freedom. After a few days of wounded silence, a fragile truce was brokered over the phone. Isabella called, her voice strained, and offered a stilted apology. "I'm sorry things got so heated," she'd said. "Why don't you come for dinner on Sunday? We can clear the air." I was hesitant, the hurt still fresh, but the pull of family, however frayed, was strong. I agreed, driven by a desperate need for things to feel normal again. That Sunday, I drove back to the house, my stomach in knots. The atmosphere during dinner was thick with unspoken words. Aaron was civil, and Isabella was overly solicitous, but the easy warmth that had once defined our family was gone, replaced by a brittle politeness. After the meal, as I was helping clear the table, my mother made a request. "Cecilia, could you do me a favor? I need the old box of Christmas ornaments from the attic. With the holidays coming up, I want to see which ones are still usable." The attic, it was a place I hadn't been in years, a dusty repository of forgotten things. It was also a place where my father, Jacob, had spent hours. He was an architect, a man who loved structure and history, and the attic, with its exposed beams and shadowy corners, had been his domain. He passed away 5 years ago, a sudden heart attack that had left a gaping hole in our lives. Thinking of him now, as I headed for the attic stairs, brought a familiar ache to my chest. "Sure, Mom," I said, grateful for a task that would take me away from the strained atmosphere downstairs. The pull-down ladder groaned in protest as I lowered it from the ceiling in the hallway. I climbed up into the dim, stuffy space, the air thick with the scent of old wood and insulation. A single, bare bulb cast long, dancing shadows across a landscape of cardboard boxes and dust-sheeted furniture. It was a graveyard of our family's past. Old toys, stacks of National Geographic magazines, my father's drafting table shrouded in a white sheet. I located the box labeled Christmas ornaments easily enough, but as I moved it, I knocked over a smaller, unmarked cardboard box that had been tucked away behind it. The lid, not properly sealed, fell open, spilling its contents onto the dusty floorboards. I sighed, kneeling to gather the scattered items. They were mostly old photographs and loose papers. As I began stuffing them back into the box, my fingers brushed against a thick bundle of envelopes, tied together with a faded red ribbon. Curiosity piqued, I pulled the bundle out. The envelopes were old, the paper yellowed with age. They were addressed in a neat, elegant script I didn't recognize. The recipient's name made my breath catch in my throat, Isabella. But the return address was local, and the sender's name was one I had never heard before, Caroline. I knew I should put them back. These were my mother's private letters, but a powerful, inexplicable urge took hold of me. The feeling of being an outsider, the sense that there were currents in my family I didn't understand, was suddenly overwhelming. This felt like it could be a piece of the puzzle. My hands trembling slightly, I untied the ribbon. The letters were dated 29 years ago, the year before I was born. I pulled the first one from its envelope. The handwriting was feminine, flowing, and filled with an emotion that was palpable even after all these years. It began, "My dearest Isabella, I hope this letter finds you well. I think of her every moment of every day. Does she look like me?" My heart began to pound in my chest. Her? Who were they talking about? I scanned the page, my eyes devouring the words. The letter was from a woman who had given up her baby, a little girl, and Isabella was the one who had adopted her. Caroline wrote of her difficult circumstances, her love for the child she couldn't keep, and her deep, abiding gratitude to Isabella and her husband, Jacob, for giving her daughter a loving home. Letter after letter told the same story, a heartbreaking narrative of a young, scared mother and the secret pact she had made with Isabella. I sat there on the dusty floor of the attic, the world tilting on its axis. The single bare bulb seemed to dim, the shadows pressing in on me. I was the baby. The little girl they were writing about was me. The realization didn't come in a flash. It seeped into me, cold and terrifying, with every word I read. My mother, the woman who had raised me, the woman whose anger had driven me from this house just days ago, was not my biological mother. My father, Jacob, whose quiet presence I still missed so acutely, was not my biological father. My entire life, my identity, was built on a foundation that had just crumbled into dust. The letters blurred as tears filled my eyes. I thought of my face in the mirror, my dark hair and eyes, so different from Isabella's fair complexion and Aaron's light brown curls. I'd always been told I took after a distant grandmother. It was a lie. A kind lie, perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. I thought of the subtle but persistent feeling I'd always had of being slightly out of step with my family, the feeling that had been so brutally amplified this past week. It wasn't just my imagination. It was real. I was different. The box contained more than just the letters. Tucked at the bottom was a small, sealed envelope with my name, Cecilia, written on the front in Isabella's familiar handwriting. My fingers were numb as I tore it open. Inside was a single photograph and a short note. The photo was of a young woman with dark, wavy hair and eyes that were startlingly familiar. They were my eyes. She was holding a newborn baby, wrapped in a pink blanket. Her face was a portrait of love and sorrow. On the back of the photo, a date and a name were written: Caroline and Cecilia, October 1996. The note from Isabella was brief, the words seeming to leap off the page. Cecilia, it read, if you are reading this, it means you have found the letters, and I am not there to explain. I hope one day you can understand. We love you. That has always been the truth. We love you. The words seemed to mock me. How could they love me and keep a secret this monumental? The carefully constructed reality of my 28 years had been a fabrication. The woman who had given me my room and then taken it away had also given me a life that wasn't entirely my own. I was a secret she had kept, tucked away in a box in the attic, hidden behind the Christmas ornaments. The whispers I'd felt in the house were not just in my head. They were real, and they were the echoes of a truth I was never supposed to find. I didn't confront Isabella that day. I couldn't. The truth was a wild, wounded animal inside my chest, too raw and chaotic to be let out. I carefully retied the red ribbon around the letters, placed them back in the unmarked box, and hid it exactly where I had found it. I took the Christmas ornaments downstairs, my movements. Robotic, my face a carefully composed mask. I made an excuse about a headache and left, driving home in a daze. The world outside my car window, the familiar streets, the setting sun, seemed unreal, a backdrop to a play in which I had just discovered I was the wrong character. Back in the safety of my apartment, I collapsed onto my own sofa, the one that had never felt more like a sanctuary. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I was the daughter of a ghost, a woman named Caroline whose face I knew only from a single, faded photograph. Over the next few days, I was consumed. I couldn't work. I couldn't sleep. My mind was a relentless loop of questions. Who was Caroline? Why did she give me up? Was she still alive? And the most painful question of all, why had Isabella and Jacob never told me? The lie felt enormous, a shadow that stretched back to the moment of my birth, touching and tainting every memory I held dear. Every family photo, every birthday party, every childhood story was now cast in a different, deceptive light. Was their love for me real, or was it a performance, an obligation to the biological mother they had promised to protect me for? The thought was poison, seeping into the foundations of my being. The anger I had felt towards Isabella about the bedroom incident now seemed trivial, a pale imitation of the profound betrayal I felt now. She hadn't just made me feel like a guest in her house. She had made me a guest in my own life story. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I returned to the house midweek, using the spare key I still had. I knew Isabella would be at her book club and Aaron was out on a photo shoot. The house was empty and quiet. I went straight to the attic, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. I retrieved the box of letters, and this time I took them with me. Back in my apartment, I spread the letters out on my dining room table, arranging them by date. I read them again, not with the shocked horror of the first time, but with the forensic focus of an investigator. I was searching for clues, for anything that would tell me more about the woman who had given birth to me. Caroline's letters were filled with pain, but also with a fierce intelligence and a quiet strength. She wrote about her love for art and music, her dream of becoming a writer. She mentioned a difficult family situation and a lack of support, vague phrases that hinted at a much larger, more painful story. She never mentioned my biological father. In one of the last letters, dated about a year after I was born, Caroline mentioned she was moving away. "I think it's for the best," she wrote to Isabella. "Starting over somewhere new is the only way I can build a life for myself. Please, don't try to find me. Just know that I will love her always." There was no forwarding address, no hint of where she was going. It was a dead end. The weight of it all was crushing. I felt utterly adrift, untethered from the only family I had ever known, and unable to find the one I had lost. I needed to talk to someone, but who? Telling my friends seemed impossible. How could I explain that my whole life was a lie? There was one person, however, who might have known something. My father's brother, my Uncle David. He and Jacob had been close, and David had always been a warm, steady presence in my life, especially after my father died. I called him, my voice shaking. "Uncle David, it's Cecilia. I need to ask you something important, something about Dad and Mom." We met for coffee the next day. I didn't know how to begin, so I simply laid one of the letters on the table between us. He picked it up, his brow furrowed in confusion as he read. I watched his face change, the confusion melting into a deep, sorrowful recognition. When he looked up at me, his eyes were full of pity. "I always told Jacob they should tell you," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "He wanted to, he was just waiting for the right time, but after he died, I guess Isabella couldn't bring herself to do it. He told me what he knew. Caroline was a young art student who Jacob had met through a university project. They had a brief, intense affair. She got pregnant. Her own family was rigidly religious and had disowned her. Jacob was already engaged to Isabella. It was a messy, heartbreaking situation. Jacob, racked with guilt but unwilling to leave Isabella, had confessed everything to her. And Isabella, in an act of what I now saw as either incredible compassion or desperate control, had proposed a solution. She couldn't have children of her own, a fact they had recently discovered and were grieving. She suggested they adopt Caroline's baby and raise it as theirs. Caroline, young, alone, and with no resources, had agreed. The story was even more complicated, more painful than I could have imagined. Jacob wasn't just my adoptive father, he was my biological father. The man whose absence I had mourned for 5 years was connected to me by blood, a fact he had kept hidden his entire life. The revelation was a second, more powerful shockwave. Erin was my half-sister. Isabella was my stepmother. The carefully defined lines of my family tree had been violently redrawn. Isabella loved you like her own, Cecilia, David said gently, seeing the turmoil on my face. She truly did, but she was always insecure. I think a part of her was always afraid that if you knew the truth, you would choose Caroline over her. And Erin's presence probably makes it all worse. Erin is hers and Jacob's in a way you aren't. It's not right, but I think that's where her behavior is coming from. His words, meant to be comforting, only twisted the knife. Isabella's recent actions, her favoritism towards Erin, her dismissal of me, it all clicked into place. It wasn't just about a bedroom. It was about biology. I was the outsider, the constant reminder of her husband's infidelity. And now, she was pushing me away, retreating into the comfort of her real daughter. The ghost I was chasing wasn't just Caroline. It was also the father I thought I knew, and the mother whose love I now questioned completely. The letters hadn't just revealed a secret, they had exposed the fault lines that had been running beneath my family for my entire life. The knowledge that Jacob was my biological father changed everything. The grief I felt for him was now sharper, more complex. I grieved for the man I knew, the kind, patient father who taught me how to ride a bike and checked my homework every night. But I also grieved for the relationship we never had, the honest, open connection that had been denied to me. He had been living a lie, and in doing so, had forced me to live one too. My anger at Isabella was now intertwined with a profound sense of pity for her. She had spent nearly 3 decades raising her husband's illegitimate child, a living symbol of his betrayal. Her recent coldness, her blatant favoritism toward Erin, was not an excuse, but I could now see the twisted logic behind it. In her mind, Erin was her true daughter, untainted by the secret that I embodied. This new understanding didn't lessen my pain, but it focused my resolve. I was no longer just a victim of a family secret. I was a detective in the story of my own life, and I needed to find the missing pieces. I needed to find Caroline. My search began with the few clues I had: her name, her connection to the university, and her passion for art. I started with old university yearbooks from the years Jacob and Caroline would have met. I spent hours in the university library's archives, the musty smell of old paper filling my lungs. Finally, I found her. A black and white photo of a young woman with my eyes and a hopeful smile. Caroline Miller. She was listed as an English literature major with a minor in fine arts. It was a start. With a full name, I turned to the internet. I searched social media, professional networks, and public records. The name was common and the trail was cold. Days turned into a week and I found nothing. The frustration was immense. It felt like I was chasing a phantom, a woman who had vanished without a trace. I revisited the letters, hoping for a clue I had missed. In one, Caroline mentioned her love for the rugged coastline of the Pacific Northwest, a place she dreamed of visiting one day. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack, but it was all I had. I expanded my search, focusing on Oregon and Washington. I looked for writers, artists, and gallery owners named Caroline Miller. And then I found her. Or at least I thought I did. An online literary journal based in a small coastal town in Oregon featured a short story by a C.E. Miller. The author's bio was brief. C.E. Miller is a writer and painter who lives on the Oregon coast with her husband and 2 dogs. This is her first published work. The initials matched. The location matched the dream she'd mentioned in her letter. My heart hammered against my ribs. Could it be her? I found the website for the literary journal and an email address for submissions. With trembling fingers, I composed a message. I didn't know what to say, how to explain the impossible story of who I was. In the end, I kept it simple, vague, a shot in the dark. "Dear Ms. Miller," I wrote, "my name is Cecilia. I am researching a personal family matter, and I have reason to believe you may have known my father, Jacob, an architect who attended the university here in the early 1990s. If you are the person I'm looking for, I would be deeply grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. I have some letters you wrote to my mother, Isabella." I hit send before I could lose my nerve. The waiting was agonizing. Every ping from my phone made me jump. For 2 days, there was no reply. I started to lose hope, convinced I had been wrong, that it was another dead end. Then, on the third day, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was C.E. Miller. The subject line was simply, "Cecilia." My hand shook as I opened it. The email was short, but it held the weight of a lifetime. "I think you have found the right person," it began. "I have thought of you every day for 28 years. I never knew if this day would come. I am in shock, but I would very much like to talk to you. Please call me. Here is my number." I stared at the phone number, the string of digits that connected me to a past I had never known. The fear was immense, a tidal wave of what-ifs. What would I say to her? What would she say to me? But underneath the fear was a powerful, undeniable pull, the need to hear her voice, to know her story from her own lips. I took a deep breath, walked out onto my small balcony, and dialed the number. The phone rang 3 times, each ring echoing the frantic beat of my heart, and then a woman's voice, hesitant and soft, answered. "Hello? Caroline?" I asked, my own voice barely a whisper. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Cecilia," she said, and the way she spoke my name was not as a question, but as a confirmation, a word she had held in her heart for 28 years. And in that single word, I heard the beginning of an answer, the start of a story that was finally mine to hear. The phone call with Caroline lasted for hours. We cried, we talked, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of connection that was untainted by secrets. She filled in the gaps that the letters and my uncle had left. She told me of her deep love for Jacob, a love that was passionate but doomed from the start. She spoke of her heartbreak and her difficult decision to give me up, a choice made not from a lack of love, but from a desperate desire for me to have a stable, 2-parent home that she couldn't provide. She had since married a kind man, a professor named Thomas, and had built a quiet, contented life. She never had other children. "I felt like my heart only had room for one," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. We made a plan to meet. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Oregon. The moment I saw her at the airport, I knew. She looked like the photograph, older of course, with fine lines around her eyes, but the same dark hair, now streaked with silver, and the same eyes. My eyes. We hugged, a long, tearful embrace that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. I spent a week with Caroline and her husband. It was a week of healing, of sharing stories and piecing together a shared history. She showed me paintings she had made over the years, many of them abstract portraits of a daughter she imagined was growing up without her. I showed her photos from my childhood, introducing her to the little girl she never knew. It was beautiful and painful and profoundly necessary. I learned that I had inherited my artistic talent from her, my love for structure and order from Jacob. I was not a random collection of traits. I was a perfect, logical combination of the 2 people who had created me. By the end of the week, a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I knew who I was, and I knew what I had to do next. I had to go back and face Isabella. I called her from the airport on my way home. "I need to talk to you and Aaron," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'll be there tomorrow afternoon." There was a nervous silence on the other end of the line before she agreed. When I arrived at the house, they were both waiting for me in the living room, their faces etched with anxiety. I had brought the box of letters with me. I placed it on the coffee table between us. Isabella flinched as if she'd been struck. "I know everything," I said, my voice devoid of accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. "I know that Caroline is my biological mother, and I know that Jacob was my biological father." Isabella's face crumpled, the carefully constructed composure of 60 years shattering in an instant. She began to sob, deep, wrenching sounds of guilt and fear. Erin just stared, her mouth agape, looking from me to her weeping mother in utter confusion. "What is she talking about, Mom?" Erin demanded. I looked at Isabella, waiting. This was her story to tell, her secret to confess. Through her tears, she began to speak. She told Erin everything. About her infertility, about Jacob's affair, about the secret adoption. She spoke of her love for me, a love that was real and deep, but always shadowed by her insecurity and her fear of losing me. "I was so afraid," she wept, her words catching in her throat. "I was terrified that if you knew, you wouldn't love me anymore, that you would want her instead. When Jacob died, I couldn't. I buried the secret with him." She turned to me, her eyes pleading. "When you and Erin were here and I saw you together, I felt that old fear. Erin is so much like me, and you have always been so much like him, like her. It brought it all back. I was wrong, Cecilia. I was so wrong. I let my fear make me cruel. I pushed you away because I was afraid of you leaving me." Erin was pale, silent, processing the monumental revelation that her family was not what she thought it was. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet. "So, all this time, Cecilia is my sister, my half-sister." "Yes," Isabella whispered. I looked at Erin, and for the first time, I saw not a rival, but another person caught in the web of our parents' secrets. Her world had been turned upside down too. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place for me in that moment. I opened the box and took out the photograph of Caroline and me as a baby. I handed it to Isabella. "Her name is Caroline," I said softly. "I just spent a week with her in Oregon. She's a wonderful person. And she is so grateful to you for raising me. She never wanted to take me away from you. She just wanted me to be loved." Isabella took the photo, her trembling fingers tracing my infant face. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "You look just like her." "I do," I said, "but I have your laugh and your stubbornness." A small, watery smile touched Isabella's lips. "You do," she agreed. "You get that from me." In that moment, the anger I had been holding onto for weeks finally dissolved, replaced by a profound, aching sadness for all the years we had lost to the secret, for the honesty that could have made our family stronger. The truth, in all its messy, painful glory, was finally out. It hadn't destroyed us. In fact, it felt like the first step toward rebuilding something real, something that wasn't hidden in a box in the attic. The aftermath of the revelation was not a magical, overnight fix. It was a slow, deliberate process of rebuilding, of learning to navigate the new, complicated landscape of our family. The first and most immediate change was that I moved back into my old room. Erin had quietly packed up her things and moved them to the guest room without anyone having to ask. It was a small, symbolic gesture, but it meant the world. It was an acknowledgement that this was my home, too, a place where I belonged. My relationship with Erin underwent the most dramatic transformation. The rivalry and resentment that had simmered between us evaporated, replaced by a newfound curiosity and a tentative sense of solidarity. We were sisters, bound not just by a shared childhood, but by blood. We spent hours talking, re-examining our memories through this new lens, understanding the subtle dynamics that had always been at play. She admitted to her own insecurities, her jealousy of my close bond with Jacob. "He was always so proud of your art," she confessed one evening. I think I was trying to get Mom's attention all to myself because I felt like you had all of his." It was a stunning admission, one that made me realize how deeply the family secrets had affected us both, turning us into competitors instead of allies. My relationship with Isabella was more complex. The forgiveness was there, but the trust had to be rebuilt, piece by piece. We started going to therapy together, a neutral space where we could unpack 3 decades of secrets and unspoken fears. She had to learn to see me not as a symbol of her husband's betrayal or a child she might lose, but as her daughter, full stop. I had to learn to see her not as a liar, but as a woman who had made a complicated choice out of love and fear, and who had done her best, however flawed that best may have been. It was hard work, filled with tears and difficult conversations, but with each session, another layer of resentment fell away, leaving behind the core of love that had always been there, buried underneath the weight of the lie. I continued to build my relationship with Caroline. We spoke on the phone every week, and she became a cherished part of my life. She was not a replacement for Isabella, but a wonderful, new addition to my definition of family. She sent me a box of her favorite books, and I sent her a portfolio of my design work. We were two artists, a mother and a daughter, getting to know each other across the miles, finding the easy comfort that should have been ours all along. 6 months after that fateful day in the attic, the house felt different. It felt lighter. The whispers were gone. 1 week. ND, Caroline flew in to visit. The thought of her and Isabella in the same room was terrifying, but it was a meeting that had to happen. I watched from the kitchen doorway as Isabella opened the front door to the woman whose child she had raised. They stood there for a long moment, two mothers bound by one daughter, the air thick with unspoken emotions. And then, Isabella stepped forward and pulled Caroline into a hug. "Thank you," Isabella whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Thank you for giving her to me." Caroline hugged her back, tears streaming down her own face. "Thank you for loving her," she replied. That evening, we all had dinner together. Me, Isabella, Aaron, and Caroline. It was surreal and it was beautiful. We told stories, we laughed, and we began to weave the frayed threads of our past into a new, stronger tapestry. My family was no longer defined by secrets or biology, but by choice, by forgiveness, and by a fierce, complicated love. I had two mothers, a sister who was now a friend, and a father whose memory I could now embrace in its entirety. My definition of home had expanded. It was my small apartment in the city, it was the house I grew up in, and it was a quiet coastal town in Oregon. I had lost the family I thought I had, but in its place, I had found the one that was truly mine, forged not in silence and secrets, but in the brilliant, healing light of the truth.